am I supposed to do an intro for pine cones? Pine cones, they're a plant. They disperse seeds. They're pretty cool. They're pretty rad. You see them everywhere. I mean, I mean, maybe you live somewhere where they don't. You see them. Gosh, you see them on the ground. You see them on the trees. Yeah, I mean, easily a top 10 plant. We're drawing a pine cone. All right, so I feel like I should apologize right off the bat for the bad quality. Don't really know what happened. Don't really know. Probably my fault, but I'm just gonna throw this out there. People in like the 1940s would have been begging for this kind of rendering, this kind of quality. So you're welcome, basically, if you're a time traveler. Jeez, I don't know. All right, so anyway, we've already missed like half the drawing. Anyway, so what we're drawing is a branch with pine cones on it, on top of a cutout of like a log, So, so right now I'm just sketching out the branch, and those little grape-like shapes are what are going to be the pine cones eventually. So you don't want to make the pine cones the same shape. You don't want to make them at the same angle, otherwise it just starts to look fake and weird and stuff like that. The branch, you want it. I decided that the branch would be kind of knobbly. All of the pine cones are roughly the same size, but they're not quite the same size shape anyway. So we're just gonna go right into drawing what the actual pine cone looks like. Of course, working left to right because I'm right-handed. Um, and so just the little back and forth little shapes, they're kind of diamond rhombus kind of shapes that you see on pine cones. And you just kind of gotta acknowledge the fact that later we're not actually going to be drawing the shapes so much as we're going to be drawing the shadows under the little pieces of the pine cone. So keep in mind that the sketches aren't permanent either, so we can change it way before we add any ink to it or anything like that. And so you just want to be careful. Make sure the shapes are random. You kind of the different kind of pine cone shapes. I don't know what are they called? Flakes, little branches off the pine cone. Just make them random. Make them different sizes. If you make them all the same size, they look flat, they look cartoonish, they don't look kind of real. And obviously, we're not going for ultra realism here, but we're going for, just something that looks good, something that looks aesthetically pleasing. And the the eye can detect when something looks a little too similar. So if your pine cones start to, if you use the same shape over and over again in your pine cone, it just starts to look off. So we're trying to put as much variability into the shapes that we see in the pine cones, trying to add as much variability as possible. And even if you start to get in a rhythm and all of the shapes start to blend together a little bit, we can always you can always try and fix it when we ink it in later. Nothing's permanent right now in this phase, so we you just gotta we're just throwing out ideas out there with the graphite. See, I just erased like an entire pine cone because I didn't think I was making the mistake. I was just talking about that I thought all of the shapes were too similar. So we're uh, we're just proving our point. On to the last pine cone, hopefully. Even sped up, this looks extremely slow. And keep in mind, a lot of you probably think I just have an amazing talent for drawing at rapid speed, light speed, basically. But this is sped up several times, so take your time with it. This drawing's pretty small. This is like on a 6 by 6 piece of paper. So if you're going bigger, it'll take a little more time. I like to work small, especially with pen. Takes a little less time. So we're looking pretty good, and I think we're just about ready to start adding ink. I mean, there I go. I'm erasing as I go. You don't really have to because I feel like even if you draw over the graphite, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter to me anyway. Um, Great. Well, so now the quality is a little better, and we can continue to ink in. Just especially with the pen, we're going to be drawing lots of shadows that on a normal drawing we'd probably just use with color. but we're gonna be using lots of black on this one because I want to. So we're just keep inking. This one, I always talk about quick, decisive movements. On this one, you can afford to be a little rough, a little random. Pine cones are that way. Nature is that way. Fur is that way. Very random, very kind of sketchy, wobbly. It makes it very easy to draw, thankfully. Um, and before I forget, our light source is coming from the upper left corner where my left index finger is residing on the page. And that's where most of the light is going to be coming from, and that's where most of our shadows are going to be. Uh, and we're just going to keep forging ahead. You can see I gave up on erasing the graphite. I mean, you can do that. Some people like to do it, they think it makes the ink pop better. I honestly don't care. I just erase afterwards. It doesn't matter to me. Um, I mean, if when you erase the graphite, you can still kind of see where you're going because of the kind of residue that's left over this. But when the graphite's still there and you're just kind of drawing over the top of it, you get a very clear path, clear view at what path you need to take. So I just like to leave it there, just for me. Um, anyway, so the pine cones are they're still going, still being drawn. Um, I don't know. I feel like I'm just filling time now. Pine cones are pretty cool. I see them a lot. Had a pine cone thrown at me at a recess once in elementary school. That was fun. They're kind of nasty little things that disperse seeds. I've always wondered if the myth is true that they like close up when when there's like a fire or something. I feel like they're not that advanced. I feel like that's some like they kind of close up like a turtle. What were those? What are those things called? There were those little toys that would pop open. Oh, Bakugans. Are pine cones like Bakugans? Would they close and open up at certain times? Is that what those things are called? I don't know. So anyway, just keep in mind, be mindful while you're inking in where your shadows are going to be. Um, uh, we're also going to add some detail to this branch later on, just some little details. Doesn't We're not going to go too extreme with the detail on this one. It's a pretty small drawing anyway. There's only so much detail you can fit in without making it look a little too busy. We're going to add just some little lines to just indicate some wear and tear. There we go. Um, Add a little more shadow to the pine cone. Yep, nice work. All right, now we're gonna just carefully we're gonna draw the outside, the this is the bark on the thing. So the inside line is going to be smooth and the outside line is going to be rough and varied. So you can see I'm kind of just going nuts with it, not being very careful like I was with the first line, being very careless. Just it's pretty thin. It's going to be colored in brown, and you can see I'm adding a little bit of dots and stuff to it, just to make it look more rough. Kind of like it's the core of a tree. I mean, that's what it is. Um, so now I go ahead. I let this dry for a while before I went ahead and erase it. Just remember that the ink smears even after you've let it dry for a while, and it kind of sucks to ruin a drawing this far into the phase by smearing the ink. So now we're going ahead with goldenrod. We're adding the highlights in over the top. Those are going to be the main highlights of the big uh, high points, the high key colors on these pine cones. But we're not adding any to the branch. I want the branch to be a different color. And then we're just going in with sienna brown just around the goldenrod. We're not even really going to touch it very much. We're going to let the goldenrod stand out very much. We're not really going to blend them. We're going to kind of keep those colors very, very separate uh, in this drawing. And just be mindful of where you're going. Try not to let the ink bleed out over the lines you've created, and you know try not to interfere with the goldenrod too much, and leave some white in there too. Adds a nice highlight. I like to do that. Um, Creates a cool effect. Now using some more sienna brown, we're gonna just put a base layer down on this branch. Again, being mindful not to let it bleed out over the edges, not too much. And then we are going to add some highlights with the Tuscan red just to darken some spots up and to just make it a different color, a kind of a contrasted color, have that kind of goldenrod and red-ish brown kind of contrast with each other. Now we're going to erase around the rim now that it's pretty well dried. I mean, it's been, a pretty long time since we've touched that. Now, just using dark brown, that's all we're going to use. Just very carefully using the fine tip. We're just going to go along this edge to give the bark some color. In retrospect, wish I would have made this a little bit bigger, made the bark edge a little bit wider because it's very, very thin. Very hard to get in there and stay even. But I mean, it looks okay. It looks cool. Now using brick beige, we're gonna fill it all in. My brick beige marker is a chisel tip opposed to my other ones, which have a fine tip and a brush tip. And I despise the chisel tip with my entire soul because it's like trying to color with a freaking expo marker, and it's awful, and I despise it and I hate it. Did I mention that I dislike the chisel tip already? I mean, it's just the worst, and you can see me just kind of struggling. I mean, it's like trying to color with a flippin' mop. It just isn't very nice. The brush tips are much better if you are planning on buying Prisma markers ever. Make sure you're buying the ones with a brush tip, not a chisel tip, because it will ruin your entire life and your marriage too, probably. I don't know. Now we're just going to add some shading now that we put the base layer down, just around the edge, just to kind of put emphasis on the middle. We're going to put that shading around the edge. And now we're going to start to create the shadow using the fine tip of the brick beige. We're actually gonna, before we do the shadow, we're gonna make the rings of the wood. Uh, so just try to make sure that they're kind of just try and evenly space yourself from the edge of the circle. Um, the just try and make sure that the space between the line you're making and the edge of the thing is even, and it doesn't matter that much because the rings on a tree aren't even anyway, so it's gonna look good no matter what you do. So you can be a little bit careless with it. We're just gonna darken some spots in just to add some randomness. Nature's random, like I mentioned earlier. And now we're gonna start to add the shadow by layering some brick beige in underneath the pine cones. Again, remember our shadow's coming from the upper left-hand corner. We're also going to use some more goldenrod to create that shadow. Um, just helps, kind of emphasize the color of the pine cone without being, too obvious. And we're blending it with a lot of the brick beige anyway, so it'll be discreet. It'll be a little bit hidden, so to speak. It won't be too obvious, but it'll give the shadow some color, which is nice. I hate it when shadows are ugly, especially like you have a beautiful, colorful painting and then somebody decides to add a big black shadow or something. Like it's nice to use just a darker version of a color that already exists in the painting, like a dark blue or a darker red. In this case, we're using the goldenrod, repeating the same color throughout the painting. Or this isn't a painting, the drawing, just to kind of maintain that kind of continuity. Makes the drawing much more appealing to the eye, in my opinion. And now we're just you just keep layering. After it dries, you add another layer until you kind of have reached that max. And we're done. It looks pretty damn good, if I do say so myself. Hate to brag, but that looks pretty stellar. Pretty excited with how this one turned out. If you have any more drawing and ideas, anything you want me to see me do, please comment below and don't forget to like the video or whatever. And you know what? I'll talk to you later. Bye.